Dr. Jim Loehr, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast, or should I say, welcome back. Now we're on round three.
I'm excited to be back, DJ. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited to have another conversation.
I always look forward to the conversations together. Really love your inspiration and your wisdom on all things sports psychology related. I'm going to dive right into. We're going to be talking a lot today about this phenomenal book, The Power of Story. Change your story, change your destiny in business and in life. And before you even get to page one, there's a quote that really stopped me dead in my tracks. I want to read that and see if that's a great place for us to start today. Quote goes like this. The life of every man is a diary in which he means to write one story and writes another. And his humblest hour is when he compares the volume as it is with what he vowed to make it. By James M. Barrie. Curious if we could start with that jaw-dropping quote.
You know, it's interesting. I love to have people think about, particularly at some juncture in their life, this notion that if who you could have become had a conversation with what you actually became, what would that conversation be like? Something prevented you from fulfilling what you dreamed was possible, and probably what was possible in many respects. And so we find detours that take us off track. And so often, as I've come to understand, it's the story we create around what's happening more than what's actually happening, more important than what really happens to us in life is the story we create around what happens to us. And you see it all the time, for better or for worse. And I really I wish I'd learned a lot more earlier in my life around story, but there was no one out there talking about that. And when the endless hours I spent with athletes, I realized that some stories actually take us to the outer limits of what we're capable of and really free us up and give us joy and hope. And other stories just really block our path, whether it's blame or whether it's we just envy or pride or arrogance, or there's so many ways that we wrap our arms around reality that can take us off the highway that we want to be on to have the best life possible. And, we have this ability, this remarkable neurological upgrade, this prefrontal cortex and cortex that enables us to be very aware of the way in which we're crafting our stories. I mean, it's not like this is an automatic reflex. We can intervene and change the story almost instantaneously. You can say, stop. And so, we developed at the Human Performance Institute, we had kind of guidelines for great storytelling. And it makes, a really, really important step forward in people's lives when they are very careful about the way they form a story before it becomes kind of, formed in concrete, where once it's really in there and you feed it consistently, it's very difficult to change that story. And at the Institute, that's what we ended up doing, was changing people's stories. And we just wish we'd have gotten earlier before that story. I talk about it as hardening of the categories, because we just can't get in there and make the changes as quickly as people would like.
I haven't said this publicly more than probably once in my life, but one of my fears is getting to the end of my life and having this, metaphorical moment where you look in the mirror and see what you could have been. And it's a fear that I have now, Dr. Jim, but it's a fear that I also use as motivation. I recently had Jody Wellman on my podcast. We talked about counting how many Mondays you have left in your life and using that as motivation, not as fear. And so this concept for me is also a motivator for me to live everything I can, do everything I can so I don't get to the end of life and look at, oh, what could I have been? Or maybe what should I have been? So I'm very aware of that right now. And I think a lot of this book and a lot of our work that we talk about is creating that awareness. Where does one start when it comes to this journey of making sure that they don't get to the end of their life, look in the mirror and go, damn, that's where I should have been. This is where I am now.
So we talked a little bit about this on our last podcast, and I call it the Tombstone exercise. It's so interesting. People don't like to look at the end of their life. You kind of assume you're going to live forever. And, looking at death is not a fun thing. So people tend to avoid it. But I learned that forcing people into that space is maybe the most important step in really getting a grounding on what you should be doing right here, right now. So at the Institute, I did this for thousands of people. It was by far the most powerful exercise I ever did with anyone. It didn't always resonate, but I would say for the majority, this was the one that changed everything for them. Because the centerpiece of everyone's life story is your purpose. Why are you here? And what are you supposed to do with this limited time that we're here? If you don't get that right, it's all chaos. If you don't have any meaning in your life and you can't make sense, if you wake up and you have nothing to do, you don't have any sense of purpose for the day, chaos reigns very quickly. You've got to have a reason to do something. And that reason can be a flawed reason, something really quite sinister, or it can be something very noble that should give back a great sense that you are on track with something important for the time you're here. But the Tombstone exercise, for those who have not heard me talk about it before, is that you go to the end of your life, and most of the time, you're never going to be able to decide consciously what's going to be on your tombstone. Other people decide that for you, and most of the time, people make stuff up. They just want people to feel good when they look at the tombstone. You have the opportunity to etch in stone, after you've carefully thought and deliberated, what would you consider to be maybe 4 or 5 words or a couple of sentences that actually describe for you the greatest life of success and meaning and purpose you could have? And so you give a lot of attention to that. You think about it. What do you want on there? And it's so interesting. So much of our energy in life is really devoted to things that never really get on that tombstone. It's like maybe a lot of energy to get gold medals, or to become the CEO of a firm, or to have your own company, or to write 5 books, or to whatever. But those never make the cut on the tombstone. What makes the cut is this notion eventually, as you dig deeper, that your life really isn't about you. It's about what you can do for others. That's the ultimate kind of sense that I've got it right. The more your life is more about you and just you, the greater sense of emptiness and the sense of pursuit, you feel like you're somehow, it doesn't add up. This isn't it. But when you get the words on that tombstone, you don't get those unless you work your butt off for them. You have to expend a lot of energy. So you work backwards. You figure out what is home base, and then every day you work backward until right now. What can I do now if I want to be a person whose one of the greatest attributes is kindness, or humility, or caring for others, or an extraordinary mother, or an extraordinary father, son, or daughter? That's kind of the beginning. And then you got to dig into those details. How do I earn humility? So I can have that on my tombstone that actually reflects who I was when I was here, or kindness, or an extraordinary father or mother. So you dig into those details, and then you say, well, what can I do now to help make sure that I qualify for that at the end of my life? And you might write that when you first get up in the morning on your things to do list, you might write a word or two that is on that tombstone, and you realize, I can't have that unless I work every single day and invest energy in it. And so for me, the most important thing is to keep the end in mind when you are, and that's also the story that you want to create, is that the most important story maybe for one person might be that I became a parent that I never had. My parent was not loving or kind, always maybe a supreme narcissist, and was always looking for me to build up their egos, and all my accomplishments were really their accomplishments, and on and on. That's not who I want to be. I want to be a parent to my children that just cares for them as human beings, and more important than their accomplishments are who are these children of mine as human beings, as persons. I want them to be persons of great character, of great honesty, of great integrity. That's what I'm most concerned about, and will invest my time and energy. So my story with them should be about that. I'm always telling stories that help them to understand this is how I believe my life should be lived. And I'm hoping at some point in your life, you'll figure out how to have the best life for you. And I have to earn it every day.
You say in the book, a flawed purpose leads to a flawed ending. I gotta assume that at some point, working with as many athletes as you did, there was probably a moment where the mission came out from some athlete's mouth and it was a little bit flawed, or it made you kind of hesitate, or made you think, as a coach, consultant, psychologist, Dr. Loehr, what did you do in that moment? Is it asking questions? Did you try to change their mind? Or is it more like, hey, if that's what you want to do, then that's what you want to do? Walk me through what it looks like from your side when you hear a little bit of a red flag, if you will.
So my guidelines for really effective storytelling, and for me, it's all about getting home. Getting home is what you wrote on your tombstone. I call that getting home. You end up in your life where you want to end up, and that's what you defined before you actually died. So it's really important that we try to get our stories straight. And the first rule of storytelling is that it's consistent with the truth, that you do everything to make sure that your story is grounded in verifiable facts as much as possible. Now, it's so interesting to me. This is maybe one of the most interesting parts of the neurotransmitter, this brain, 6 inches of space between our ears. Everyone thinks that their version of reality, the story the world they see, and thus their story, is reality.
Mhm.
And anyone who doesn't see it that way, they just they don't have it wired up right. I've got it and they don't. So, you know, our brains are designed that they kind of have to be that way. If we didn't think that what we saw was the real world, we would have nothing but chaos. So we have to believe our version, or we would change our version. But the fact is that we don't have direct contact with the real world. None of us do. We have contact with the world through our sensory portals, our 5 sensory portals. And that data comes streaming in. Right now, you're getting a lot of auditory data. You hear Jim Loehr's voice, and some, if it's on a Zoom and they can see my picture or your face, they're getting visual data. But you are getting streaming data in, millions and millions of bits of information, and the processor has to make sense out of that incoming data. And there's a priority for the data that's being entered into the system. And the priority is to accept those things that are already consistent with what's been stored in the past. And if it's inconsistent, right away, you kind of put a red flag up and you go, well, wait a minute, it's not what I believe. What Jim just said, I don't believe that. So you either put it on hold, you purge it as complete nonsense, and you just move on. You don't hear it. And we have the ability to hear something and then morph it so that it becomes exactly what we want to store in terms of consistency with what we've already got in the brain itself, in this white matter between our ears. So the more that we are able to be around people who tell us the same thing, tell us what we want to hear, we love being around those people. But maybe all those people have stories that are a little bit tainted. We see people with absolutely crazy stories, but because they're around people who have the same stories, they're all convinced they're correct. Our job is to try to figure out what is real. And it's very hard with all the misinformation and disinformation that exists today. Nobody knows what's true. And there's so much information coming in. Politics is probably the best example. You got people who absolutely believe that their whole version of reality is diametrically different from someone on the other side. In fact, they're willing to go to war or to kill one another because they believe that one is actually the devil incarnate, and that should be eliminated from planet Earth, or the other side feels the same way, that it's a threat to humanity. And yet, this is all coming from, the same world. There is an objective world, but it's our version of it that is what's driving our behavior. So it's really hard today. So people who, even in the scientific world, it's very, very hard to get to truth. When they do these anonymous surveys of scientists in universities, and they ask them how much do they fudge their results to get a positive outcome so that they can get funding again, it can be as high as 20 to 30%. So even out of scientific journals, and then we also know that scientific journals, because who is funding the research, and the politicalization of research has become rampant. And so it's very hard, even when you go to the journals, and I'm a nutcase for the journals, you got to look at who's funding it, what are the results, and how do we make sure that this isn't just another stake in the ground that actually supports what was supposed to be a predetermined outcome if you want to continue to stay in the university or in the line of funding that supports so much of our department. So it's just a real conundrum for everyone. If we all had direct contact with the real world, just straight up, we'd all have the same story. But, and then we'd have to look at all the individual differences, but of our previous experiences and so forth, and how that interfaces with the real world. But that's how I start when I'm working with someone. We try to get to what is the truth. What are some possible ways of looking at this that might be more aligned with the truth? So that you've got it lined up like this. Is this the only interpretation? Is this actually the most coherent story? And then the next thing is, does this story reflect your deepest values and beliefs? Is this really connect to you at your best? What kind of story is this all about? Is this the story you're really proud to represent to the world as the best part of you? And then does this story take you where you want to go? Where does this lead us if we go in this direction? And is this story one that inspires you? Does it give you hope and inspiration for the future? If it just literally crushes your hopes and dreams and aspirations, there's no way out of this, it's a terrible story. We live on stories. And then the last thing, it should inspire you to take action, to do something, to move this story in a direction, or to find out more truths as much as possible. That's why and you said it at the beginning of our interview, you said that curiosity is maybe the most important asset we all have. We need to look deeper into everything. That's why arrogance is almost a kiss of death. When you think you've got it and you lock all the drawers, you're probably in serious trouble, because we need to have this sense of humility that I could be wrong. Jim Loehr could be wrong on everything he's written. And I could go back and look, and I keep going back and looking at the data and see how much did I miss on that. But if you don't have humility and you believe you've got it wired 100% correct, and that arrogance, that leads to, to the point where no one who doesn't believe what you believe, they're just goofy. And maybe they're evil because they don't agree with your view of the world. And you can look at it through the lens of politics. You can look at it through the lens of almost anything that's going on in the world in terms of our navigating from where we are now to where we're going. If you get in your car and your nav system doesn't know what home base is, and then the orbiting satellites can't assess where your actual location is, you don't know the truth because it can't get there, your story is going to be a mess. And unfortunately, this is probably my biggest concern for mankind, that our brains are very vulnerable, very malleable, and it's very hard to resist information coming in that may support what you believe already, but that belief is really flawed. And now you just go to people that have the same bloody orientation. You will die with that orientation, and it may be absolutely as tragic a belief as possible. And prejudice, slavery, gangs. I mean, you just go back through the annals of history and you realize these beliefs that people had. And some were persecuted, some were burned at the stake because they didn't say that that Earth was the center of the universe. They said the sun was. And so they're burned at the stake. And so, the world is flat. And those who didn't believe the world was flat were nutcases. And then when you finally get to someone who says, no, here it really is, everybody goes, are you kidding me? But a lot of times our beliefs have tragic outcomes if we pursue them.
One of the reasons that you and I get along so well is because we both, really jam on this idea of creating the mission. That's what we're talking about here, is the ultimate mission. And when I'm working with athletes, Dr. Lair, I do what's called an MVP process. We first do your M, which is your mission, your V, which is your vision, and your P, which is your principles or your behaviors. And everything needs to support the mission. So the mission comes first, is at the top of the page. Everything else that we fill out has to support the ultimate mission. And it's been really cool to see kids, especially student athletes in the high school arena, fill this out and be asked questions they've never asked before, like the Tombstone question. How do you want to be remembered? Or at the end of the season, how do you want your coach to talk about you when he or she is at the banquet? Getting them to look ahead has been a really powerful exercise. One of the things that I loved about your book, there's two stories that I wanted to share about the power of the ultimate mission. First is Michelle Wie. This is cool. I've never heard this before. I'm just going to read this real quick. Michelle Wie, the golf phenom, is one of the rarities, as I found out the first time we met and I asked her, you guessed it, why she played. I'm not playing for myself, said Michelle, 14 at the time. I'm playing to make a statement, to do some good in the world. I want to be a statement to women that most of the barriers we face are self-imposed. I want girls to think, if she can hit the ball 308 yards on average, what can I do? I'm sure my jaw was hanging. 14 years old, and she comes up with that? Most 14-year-olds aren't that wise. Here was someone who got her story straight from the beginning, someone with balance. Not surprisingly, Michelle's first public gesture after turning professional was to write a $500,000 check to victims of Hurricane Katrina. When I heard about it, I thought, regardless of what happened with her golfing career, she had positioned herself beautifully to live a fulfilling life. It was clear that she understood at a remarkably young age the necessity of a good and noble premise. After that, when she and I would talk, the focus was always on playing and succeeding at golf, the vehicle for completing her ultimate mission. She never once talked about money or fame or anything remotely connected to them. It became clear to me why this teenage girl found it surprisingly easy to eschew afternoons at the mall with her friends and instead go out day after day to the course or the driving range, play hole after hole. She needed to get better because it was only by getting better that she could achieve her purpose. I'm playing to make a statement. What are your thoughts on that as you hear that back?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, the power of purpose, for better or for worse. And if you have a noble purpose, purpose opens up your vault of energy. We tend to be energy conservative, to be very stingy with our energy, and that comes from our ancestors. But if you want to be extraordinary in something, if you want to really complete a noble mission, you're going to have to invest a lot of energy. So you really have to have some way of convincing your body to just go after it, just let it all go. I mean, you've got to find ways to renew that energy, but you've got to go against thousands of years of really a bias towards conservation. And so, if she ever accomplished what she wanted as a golfer, as long as she leveraged her athletic career to make it possible for others to understand what they might be able to do in their life, I mean, it's a success. That's why with everyone I work with, and I'm sure you do the same, very few of the athletes that are out there are going to make a living for the rest of their life off of their competitive experiences, after their sports. They're going to somehow go on and have a life after sport. And what I've always said is that let's use this fantastic experience that you're having as an athlete, or this struggles with injuries and all the disappointments, and I just can't measure up and all this. Let's just use it, leverage it to become a better, more resilient um, person of great character for the big game, for the game of life, the one that actually matters. If you become an arrogant little snot-nosed person because you can hit a tennis ball or hit a golf ball better than a bunch of other people, but you walk away, you believe you're somehow queen or king of the hill because of that, and you should have all these privileges. You've kind of risen above everyone else because you can do that, but the way in which you treat people on the way to the top is an abomination. Then that sport has actually done you serious harm. And I see this not all the time, but I see it when people are so obsessed with winning that there are a lot of ways to win. You can cheat, you can, walk over dead bodies to get to the top. But I've been around long enough, I see what happens to those people. People begin to realize, hey, this is who you really are. They don't want you to be on top. There's a way to, in fact, people take great effort just to dethrone you because they're not proud of you being at that maybe top of that age group or at that level of competitive performance. And so sustained performance is really connected to your, what I call moral character, your ability to, through thick and thin, be honest, have integrity, care about people, keep yourself in perspective, have humility, resilience, have a sense that, hey, I have perspective here. I can hit a tennis ball or a golf ball or water polo or anything else. I can do something, but I've had a lot of opportunities, and that's not who I want to define myself. I'm more than my scores. I'm a person. And if I want to do that, I'm going to have to measure up on what I hope will be values and connections that go far beyond my ability to perform in a competitive environment. And what I found is that's how I got to the whole character space, that the stronger you are as a character in terms of your treatment of others, it fills what I call this hidden scorecard, where you start feeling pretty good about yourself, and then you're not having to win all the time to feel good about yourself. You're more than that. You're a person that has value if you never won another contest. And so it frees you up. You're more relaxed. You get into just the enjoyment of that game, and it gets you closer to that flow state, that sense of what I call ideal performance state, because you're not fighting for your psychological survival. Your psychological survival is tied to things that are much more under your control and connect directly to what we hope will be that noble purpose that will dictate everything toward the at the end of your life in terms of the ultimate measure of success.
I want to talk about self-talk. It's something I talk a lot about. I'm very passionate about, and I haven't really done a podcast on it. And I think you're the perfect person to talk to about that inner voice and outer voice. Let's start with just a broad question, and then we'll go in a little bit deeper. What is the inner and the outer voice? And Jim Loehr, what do perhaps most people get wrong about this concept of self-talk? Let's start broad, and then we'll go deeper.
So, the world of sports psychology has this language of self-talk. And, I was very familiar with the research and everything else. But all of my experiences in all these different competitive venues, I began to realize that there is a kind of a power broker in our lives. And the ultimate power broker is the real you, is what's going on deep inside you. And that is the voice that almost no one hears but you. That's the silent voice. That's the private voice. I'm speaking to you, and you're speaking to me and to the audience who's listening with our public voices. And that's what we think really makes the difference. But I spent years at the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy doing all this remote recordings of what people said to themselves to make it public. We put it on an audio tape, and then we go in and condense it down, and maybe the whole 2.5 hour match into 7 minutes of the talk that they would have. And I would start it by saying, and this is the coach that you've had inside helping you get through these tough moments. And the voice would say, "You're such an idiot. I hate you. What the hell are you doing out here? I have no forehand." Goes on. And almost immediately they began to realize that they were fighting on two fronts. They were fighting the person within, they're fighting with themselves, and they're fighting an opponent. So we began to realize that this inner voice is probably closest to what I call command central, to this very important processing center in the brain. And that voice starts forming sometime in the early years, very early years. So you have a voice by the time you're 5. And that voice typically is the accumulation of all the voices, all the auditory inputs from all those people in your life thus far. If you have a dominant father who was very critical, unless you rose up above and kind of really changed the channel, you're going to have that very critical voice. And so what we learned is the way that people talk to you, important people, is the way you'll actually talk to yourself. And for me as a parent, and for all those people that I work with, the parents of athletes, it's a really important understanding that before you say something, just know that this may one day be the way they speak to themselves. And that's the real place where all this plays out. So if you call them stupid and really say, if I'd have had your opportunities, I'd have been a superstar, and you're saying it to motivate them, that's typically not what happens. They begin to coach themselves in the way you talk to them. And most people stop and change on a dime when they realize that. And so this inner voice starts very early, and it's very primitive. And I call it untrained. I call it inner voice one, where it's just kind of off the wall, can say anything. And most athletes think, oh, it's just like air going through my head. It doesn't matter. But we've learned that that's not the case, certainly in my experiences and all the work, the data we've collected at the Institute. We found that the more you actually can get your voice aligned with the mission and with what you really, who you want to be as a person. And we use this reflection. How would you talk to someone you deeply cared about in the same situation? What would you say to them? You probably wouldn't say, you dumbhead, what's the matter with you? You look like a loser. You're not trying that hard. What you would say is, you know, let's raise the temperature here a little bit. Let's get a little more heat in the kitchen. You can do this. Let's just step up. Believe in yourself. Come on, this can happen. You're better than this. Let's just see if we can find it. Whatever it is, that's the way you want to be coaching yourself. And so I want people to get to the point where if your private voice were made public for everyone on a big jumbotron or something, you would be so proud, because this is the best coaching you could be. Your inner voice is your coach. It's your inner coach. But for so many people, it's their inner critic. It's not a great coach. And you would never want to coach someone like that if you were really trying to help them go to the next level or to get through a tough time. But you coach yourself like that. And that's because it's untrained. It's it reflects other people's voices. I want your voice to be the dominant voice. And I want you to train that voice. I call that inner voice 2. It's a trained voice. It's a voice of wisdom, of perspective, of armed with your purpose, armed with your values, armed with a filter that actually makes it really a beautiful coaching session from the inside. And no one knows you better than you. In tennis, you have all these coaches who can coach you professionally. And I'm not a fan of any of that, because all the players are looking to their coaches and trying to get advice, and I would much rather have your voice down. That's the beauty of tennis, is that you're on your own out there. You got years. I would love to have more coaching for the juniors, but once you're in the pros, you got to rely on yourself. I don't want you blaming your coaches for bad advice. I want you to say, wait a minute, that's what I decided. Or a golfer, I want you pulling the club. I want you to hear the information, and then I want you in charge, because you know more than anyone else, I don't care how close they are, what you need to hear. I want you running the show. And that we work for the rest of our lives training that inner voice to be a voice that we're proud of, that actually is on the same team that we are. And we speak to others the way we speak to ourselves, and it comes across with great sincerity and authenticity. We can say one thing, publicly, and have a completely different feeling or way of processing on the inside. And people can feel a lot of times you're phony as a $2 bill. And so, but even though we don't like what people are saying, if it's the truth, at least we kind of know where they stand. I would rather be around someone who's, more on the truth side, but respects the fact, not trying to hurt feelings and use it as a hammer to beat people up. But so I can trust what they're saying, as opposed to someone who just blows, these platitudes in the air, makes everyone feel good, but on the inside is absolutely in a different place. This is why I don't like politicians, because they become very skilled with their public voice, saying what other people want to hear. When they get into office, they do what their inner voice dictates or what their party dictates. And I get, very concerned that as human beings, we have two worlds. we can live on the inside and conceal everything. And then on the outside, no one has any clue who we really are because we never allow that to be vetted properly, because you're afraid of what other people might think. But there probably is a way to filter this so that you feel comfortable with what you said and it's not an outright fabrication or lie about what you're actually saying. And I would love to have the political world be more aligned with that, but it's not. Politics is not about the truth, it's about who wins.
It is surprising to me to see athletes sometimes where they'll say everything out loud. The public voice is spot on. Everything that you want to hear as a coach, it's spot on. And then they open up someday to you on the inner voice and it's completely opposite. I've had a couple of these scenarios and it throws me off guard. I go, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. So I'm curious, Dr. Lair, what does it look like to improve the inner voice? What's the strategy? What can we do? I have one example I would love to hear your input on and then hear what your thoughts are. I work with an athlete. She's a basketball player, and we'll just call her Sally for this story. And Sally sometimes feels before games anxious, and she doesn't want to feel this anxiety before games. And so the exercise I brought to her was, well, after the games, you don't feel anxiety, and the next day you don't feel anxiety. It's only that moment right before the game. What if we wrote a letter to what we called anxious Sally? I want you to write a letter to this person, like almost give her like this alter ego or this different persona. Write a letter to her from Sally to anxious Sally. What are the things that you would say to her? And she wrote this really long letter. Dear anxious Sally, don't be anxious because blah 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 blah. And it's coming from her inner voice.
For
And
sure.
I thought it was a great exercise for her because I asked her after she reads it, "How do you feel?" "I feel really calm. I feel confident. I feel like I know who I am." So I think there was some power in being able to write yourself a story or be able to write from a different vantage point. From last year in the College World Series, there was a really cool activity that both schools did where they had each program go into left field in the back corner of the stadium, and they had a fake phone and they filmed each kid as if they were calling the 5-year-old self or the 8-year-old little leaguer. What would you tell that person? Hey, you wouldn't believe it. I'm playing the College World Series tonight. You'd be so proud of me. I'm so excited to. And it's this moment of taking yourself away from the moment and being able to give yourself the right inner voice. So putting those couple ideas together, is there anything else that you would say as far as either whether it's writing or anything else to improve that inner voice? And do you like my exercise? Is that something that you would encourage?
Yeah, no, that's very consistent with this notion that, you ask her basically to coach herself. She was coaching herself,
Yes.
but she coached herself from a little different perspective. And what I use is if you were coaching someone you deeply cared about, what would you say to her? And that voice starts to become different. It's very different. So if you're going to create a story, let's create a story. Let's say you have this girl that's very anxious, and which is very common with everyone. They have this performance anxiety and they don't do well and they hate themselves afterwards, and they talk to themselves positively about it and they go out and they get so locked up they can't play. That's competitive athletics. And so we start with that. Say, yeah, I've got really some rough anxiety that's blocking my path. Okay. And so let's say you are coaching your best friend in the same situation. Um, she's got it. What would you say to her? And let's say in the course of a competitive battle, what would you say to her? It's okay. It's human. It means you care. And we've got to get better and better at handling this. And it's going to be throughout my life. It's not going to be just in sports. I'm going to have a lot of moments that are going to be really tough that I don't want to freeze up. And this is an opportunity for me to get a little perspective. And it's not a life and death situation. This is a game. No one's going to die out here if I don't do well. So let's just try to enjoy this process. Let's be grateful for the opportunity to be out here and really, and so they kind of work that territory and they come up with a whole different kind of sense of story around what's happening. the brain is operating in the way it is because it perceives this to be a terrible threat. And afterwards, if she beats herself up really badly for having choked her brains out, and she doesn't really even come out of her room for 2 days, and she's depressed, she feels awful, the brain remembers that. And the brain stores negative memories much more powerfully than positive. So when she gets into another type situation, the brain goes, oh my God, this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal cortical axis starts dumping in these powerful stress hormones, cortisol being one of the most common. All of a sudden, her muscles are tight, the brain frequent or oscillation frequencies of her brain are increasing, and she doesn't see things as well, and she's right back there. And that's because the brain says, wait a minute, we're back to where we were the last time I beat myself up. I didn't eat for 2 days. I couldn't sleep at night. I hate myself. So the brain has you either fight, which you normally can't do, or you run away, which you can't do. So you freeze. And so those are just not very appropriate options. We need a different story to bring out something different. And I want to know how to coach myself. So the way we do that is to write the story out. And so maybe normally 4 or 5 times, how am I going to deal with, how do I want to coach myself when I'm in that difficulty? I want my private voice to lead me, and I'm going to be consistent with my very best coaching voice, trained coaching voice when I get in that situation. And you write it out 4 or 5 times, you read it multiple times, and you go out there and you'll notice that voice starts coming up. And now you're handling the nerves better, and you realize writing down this in your journal is one of the most powerful ways to train your private voice. So when I'm working with clients, I'll have them list 20 things that give them trouble during competition. And so they check them off. They might start with the first one. How would you coach someone that you deeply cared about in that situation? What's the best? Knowing what your purpose is and everything. I want you to write it out and then read it. And then the next day, write it out again from memory, read it, see how many things you would like to add. And then your brain, what you're doing is you're creating new neural networks in your brain for processing this information in a different way. You're creating a new story that can change the outcome in tremendous ways. And if you listen to how the public voices of athletes in various sports, how they talk about the pressure, how they talk about what's going on, how their preparation mentally for an event, they're very careful. And what they're hoping is that's going to translate into their inner voice, which is really the master storyteller and is really the arbitrator of pretty much everything that happens. But if you've only had that voice once or twice, the other voice is going to dominate. So you have to write, you have to think about it, coach yourself. When you think about a great coach, how many years has it been that you've had to work to become a great coach? To become a great coach of yourself, you've got to work the territory. You're not going to be a great coach just because, oh, now I got my inner voice, and you go out and, oh, that doesn't work. A great coach has to train the tone and the content, their wisdom. They have to be able to access a lot of wisdom from the past. And what am I going to say to my team now? They just had a miserable loss. What are you going to say? He is coaching, or she is, their inner voice on how to metabolize that loss. And then they're hoping that that will go in to their inner voice chamber and begin to help them understand how to deal with tough times. How are we going to become better tomorrow as a result of what happened today? And if you get beat up too much, normally that becomes a bigger obstacle in the future.
So what I'm gathering from you, Dr. Lair, like most things in mental performance, most things in life, this needs to be trained. We need to train the inner voice. You need to practice the inner voice. What I really want to get out there with the listeners is this isn't something that you think about once and then you hope that it comes out when you need it. This is something that could be a daily type of a practice. Can you
You
expand on
have
how
to
this is a
work the
practice?
territory. You have to create those neural pathways, and it's you create them, you innervate them, myelinate them through repeated investment of energy. So you get back what you invest your energy in. So if you invest your energy in calmness and poise and a sense of, I can do this. This is something I enjoy. Those pathways will start to dominate. You can't cut out the old ones. They just decay with, there's no energy innervation. You just don't give them your energy. And all of a sudden your brain shifts. There's something happening in your brain. And now you kind of like competition and you love being in those moments of pressure. You actually are better there than you are just in practice. And I see this all the time, but it's hard work. And you got to work the territory. And you work the territory with your energy investments.
I love it. This is awesome. Is there anything else with self-talk or inner voice and outer voice that you think is important for athletes that maybe they're not getting educated on nowadays?
Well, for me, it's just a whole lot more than just self-talk. It's like, self-talk just didn't really resonate very deeply for me. I mean, there's a whole lot more going on there. And the the notion that we're going to always be coaching ourselves in some way until the last breath. The only voice we'll hear at the hour of our death is our own. And if you haven't worked that inner voice to help you become a masterful, wise, kind of trusted voice in your life, the most important voice that you'll ever hear is yours. And the more you work at that, the more you can really rely that, hey, I can get home with this voice. I can have a great life with this voice. And it's not that I just do all platitudes. Sometimes that voice is tough. Hey, wait a minute. You didn't prepare yourself. The truth is, you kind of winged it. And then you let yourself get a little wild and crazy out there, and it really hurt you. And it actually hurt the team. You need to face the truth, get that cleaned up, and it's probably going to be a big part of your preparation for the next event, but that's not going to happen. So it's not all, oh, you're the best, you're the greatest. It's truth, man. I want to know what the truth is, but I want it in a form that's digestible and helps you, inspires you to be better for tomorrow.
I need to go back to a statement that you said because I think it needs to be echoed again. You said that your outer voice becomes their inner voice. And I'm a brand new parent to a 6 month old. So this is very top of mind for me. Coaches out there, parents out there, that's a big statement. I don't want to just gloss over it. Can we revisit that? What does that mean when your public voice becomes their inner voice? It's so powerful.
So let's say you're in a restaurant and you have your year-old or 2-year-old in the restaurant, and something happens and your 2-year-old starts screaming. They wanted crayons, didn't have it, or nobody knows what, and you're trying to figure it out. But it's disrupting everyone in the restaurant. Everyone's there to try to have a nice meal. And you have, maybe your instinct is to say, shut up. Maybe your instinct is maybe to just put your hand over that person's mouth and say, listen, you straighten up or you're going to get a spanking. We can't do this. This is terrible. Look at everyone's looking at us. Or you can say, I'm going to give you a choice here. If you want to continue to scream, I have to go outside with you. We're not going to be able to eat together. I'd like to be here and have everyone eat and have a nice dinner. And the little guy just continues to scream and yell. So you very politely, you pick the little guy up or girl up, take him outside and let him scream. So, you can try to help me understand, why are you crying? What's going on here that you would be so furious? and can't even articulate it. He's just continuing to cry. And you just say, okay, well, the consequence is, you and I don't get to eat in there. We don't get to be with the family, and it makes me sad. And I wish I understood why you're so upset, but I don't know. But I really I want you to learn to express what's upsetting to you. We got to deal with this. And that is so when you think about if that conversation is embedded in that young boy's brain, what's the consequence of that? Hey, we need to settle down. We're not going to disrupt other people. My voice is calm. I didn't spank you and actually give you this sense of, it's not like maybe you could spank a child who goes out in the street because you want them to remember that pain so they don't go out in the street again because they get hit. But being in a restaurant, maybe that's not the best where you want to inflict any kind of obvious pain, but you'd like for them to understand the consequence of what's going on here. And so that's very simple exercise where you did not get to eat in the restaurant, nor did your child, will probably have a lasting impact. So the next time he goes in and starts a temper tantrum, you just remind him, I'm very disappointed that you're unhappy. Do you want to tell me what's going on? We're going to handle it, or we're going to have to go back outside. And I don't want to do that because I'd like to eat with the family. And that begins to resonate, that begins to affect the way in which that young boy or girl starts to form some kind of, as opposed to, you little snot, do you realize what you've done? You make me so angry with you. I hate you when you do this. This is just the worst I don't know what to do with you. You're a maniac. And so those words also go in. And then later on, all of this starts to develop into some kind of inner voice that may or may not help them navigate through preschool, through junior, high, for grade school, junior high, high school, and then into real life. And when parents realize this is going to go right in, and the accumulation of these voices is what's going to dictate their destiny, you start acting in a very different way and speaking to them with your public voice, which will in all likelihood be a major part of their inner voice, which is their destiny.
It's such a powerful lesson. Totally changes the way that I think about life and my relationship with my daughter. It could not be more spot on. Dr. Jim Loehr, this is a lot of fun. I closed down my podcast with the same question. I've been looking forward to your answer on this. No pressure. I'm looking forward to your answer for this for quite some time. The $1 million question looks like this. What do you know now at age 82 that you wish you knew at 32? What do you know now at age 32, at age 82 that you wish you knew at 32? And I like to take off the table anything like there's nothing that I would say, no regrets. I'm looking for a piece of advice from somebody who's so wise like yourself. What would your answer to the $1 million question be?
All I can say is this has been an iterative process. I look back and I realize how naive I was, how little I knew at certain times. I would have done a lot of things differently because I just didn't have the information. And when I think about how much more, the more I know, the more I realize I don't know anything. The more I realize that I need to stay very humble and be open to the fact that I could be wrong on a lot of things because my neural processor is flawed, like all of ours. And so I guess the lesson that I look back on my earlier Jim Loehr and I go, how the hell didn't I know more then? Seems like I should have figured that out back then, but I didn't have the experience. And all the books I write, I don't write to become famous or anything else. I have an insight that I think might be helpful to other people. And I hope I got it right. I haven't had to take back too many things because I'm kind of a science geek. I like to make sure that before I say something, I can back it up, or it's going to be because I've had so many I look at my life, I've had so many great teachers, all these world-class athletes, 17 number ones. It's an incredible database. And some of them were the most miserable human beings on the planet. I mean, they were not happy. And but they accomplished all these things, and they got into all kinds of messy situations. And it's because the sport, and I used to be all about winning, and then I began to realize that winning is not the ultimate game. It's the big game of life that actually matters. So for me, who you become as a consequence of the chase is far more important than whatever the outcome is on the chase. We're all born to chase, but we want to chase for the right reason and for the right thing. And what we want to chase is becoming extraordinary human beings with great moral and ethical character that guide us in everything, and with this sense that, hey, I'm not perfect, but I'm going to try to be better every day, and that I really don't know that much. I got a lot to learn. I think if we can get to that point, we have what might be considered some real insights and wisdom that can help others.
A lot of wisdom today. I learned so much. I love the concept of the ultimate mission. So just to kind of recap some of this stuff, because there's great lessons in there, guys, guys and gals listening. The ultimate mission. What is your ultimate mission? What is going to fuel you? For mine, I'll just share really quick. My mission is to energize, empower, and educate athletes on how to use their mindset to their advantage so they can become the best versions of themselves, not only in the game of sport, but more importantly, in the game called life. That's
Mm.
my current mission. Will it change in a few years? Perhaps, but that's the world I'm living in right now. So create the ultimate mission and then create the behaviors that follow the mission. I think that's the action piece to this. You talk about the three steps. First, it has to have purpose, then it has to have truth, then it has to have action. Well, none of those are any good if we don't have that third one, the action. So I
Mhm.
love that concept, and I just want to make sure my listeners understand that you need to create some sort of a checklist or whatever it's going to be to make sure that the actions are in alignment. And then the public and the private voice, try to get those in alignment. Parents, coaches, know that your public voice has a direct impact to your student or your athlete's inner voice. And then when it comes to your self-talk or your inner voice, for a better word, perhaps, is would you be proud of the words you're saying if it were on a scoreboard? What would you say to your best friend who's going through some of the same situations that you are? And then to close down what you just said, the most important thing is not who you become, or sorry, is not what you achieve, but it's who you become in the result of the chase. Did I recap that well?
I'd say you did it just about as perfect as it could be.
Awesome. Jim, you're the man. This is a lot of fun. I really look forward to our conversations every year. I'll look forward to the next one. Thank you so much for taking the time. How can my listeners support you? Obviously, a lot of this conversation was about the power of storybook. Is there anywhere else that you'd want to send my listeners?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Jim Loehr, Loehr, and then I have a website, jim-lair, Loehr.com. And most of my videos and all the things that I've produced are and books are available on those sites. So I always enjoy our conversation, and thanks for having me on again. I hope we got some good stuff going here, DJ.
Thanks, Jim.